Thanks for the intro, Jim and Richard. Thanks for being here, Suzanne and Aletha and Kelly. Thanks for asking me to share some things today. And what I'm going to do today is talk about the growth gears. The growth gears is actually a book, and this is what the book looks like. That was written by Art Saxby, the founder and CEO of Chief Outsiders, as well as the CMO of CMOs, Pete Hayes, wrote this book called The Growth Gears a couple of years ago, because what they realized was that growth can be a disciplined process, but a lot of companies don't understand that or know that, and we as chief marketers can help them figure that out. So I've already given my bio. I'll mention about my little M and big M marketing, and for those of you that don't know what that means, little M marketing is usually the things that companies do that we sometimes refer to as random acts of marketing that can include producing a website, making brochures, maybe saying, hey, we need social media, somebody should talk on Facebook or LinkedIn for us, etc., without any particular care to how they got there or what the strategy is to do all that. Big M marketing then becomes the strategy and the positioning of things that we're going to go through here is what the growth gears lays out. That is a great way to move your business forward by understanding that process. So first of all, Chief Outsiders. We're unique because we are the largest national fractional CMO firm in the country. We are virtual, so oddly enough, we all work from home already, so the COVID thing didn't really hamper us in that way. Naturally, we lost some business. We had accounts that said, hey, we can't afford to pay now, etc. But as far as the way we do business, we weren't impacted at all. We do provide CMOs for small and mid-sized companies, and we're substantial because we've got 70 plus CMOs located throughout the country. And CMOs is a Chief Marketing Officer is what CMO stands for, because I know you should never use an acronym without explaining it first in a presentation or on a paper or a blog or something. So our CMOs are experienced executives. We're not career consultants. One of the criteria to become a Chief Outsider is that you had to have been the head of marketing, the top marketer for one or two companies before for a mid to larger size company. And then we're very experienced. We're not career consultants because of that. Now we're proven, and I just learned Sunday we picked up our 1,000th client. We actually can now say we worked with over 1,000 management teams across 70 plus industries during the 10 years we've been in existence. And then from a voice of the customer point of view, our net promoter score is triple the industry average. So bottom line is our mission statement is very simple. We're here to make big things happen for small to mid-sized companies. Now we did some research when we had 800 or so customers before and found out that there were 5 different normal business dilemmas that CEOs sometimes come across. The first was they're stuck indifferent. They believe new growth will come from old growth, but they're not sure where because they're looking inside the 4 walls a little bit too much. The marketplace is moving. They don't know why. So they're stuck. They know they need to do something different. They don't know what that is. A second thing is the random acts of sales and marketing. I just explained what random acts of marketing are. It's doing the advertising and tactical things without strategy behind it. And that usually happens when people do that. They don't realize a solid return on sales. The activities aren't anchored in strategy. Things just aren't working well. And typically they only grow by adding sales resources. And another thing to understand about Chief Outsiders is in 2019, about 65% of our customers or our clients were business-to-business clients. So me as a business to consumer or customer marketing person, I helped fill in a void that Chief Outsiders had to a point. And we certainly had a lot of B2C CMOs, but we did a lot of B2B business. And that's an interesting thing, which is where a lot of organizations that we've worked with may have a sales function and they don't have the marketing function. The marketing function actually provides the sales brochures and the conference material and the conference booth and stuff for the sales team. Another one, should I expand my business footprint? CEO may ask the question, how much business can I get from my current customers? Do I know if I should expand into new markets? And if so, how do I scale? And the last two, which I think works in all business, but really works in franchising, Kelly, especially in the restaurant business, is that pricing and price value let me start over. Margins erode. When costs go up and you can't raise your price, margins erode. It kills your EBITDA. Things get tricky. So price and value solutions are required, and sometimes a lot of teams only know how to do what they call cost plus pricing versus market value pricing. And then finally, competition. Who isn't in an industry that doesn't have a lot of competition? I think everybody on this call has competition somewhere. Some are more intense than others. And it's a good idea to know who your competition is, what they do, and how are you going to defend or avoid them, or are you going to attack them? There's different strategies to take when it comes to competition. So we did some research to start it out. It is 8 years old now, but did some research from the University of Texas McCombs School of Business. And what we found, what the research showed, was that the best run firms often have the hardest time growing. What that means is running a company, the CEOs that were great at running a company and had great operations, they focused primarily inside the four walls. They very rarely looked out the window, okay? So running a company optimizes inside the four walls, and they're very operationally focused. Another group in this research showed that they were a little more external. They grew a company by aligning to what was going outside the four walls. And so they tended to look out the window a lot more. They were still great operationally inside, but they also looked out. In that research with the McCombs School of Business, 55% of the 200 CEOs that we interviewed were operations focused, 45% were market focused. That was based on the interviews with 200 CEOs in 27 mid-sized industries and companies. So what did we learn when we started to segment the data on that? So first of all, the operational folks, the CEOs that were operationally excellent within their four walls, usually came from an operations background. And what happened with them was typically they were very satisfied with their current results and they were growing at an industry rate, but they were not satisfied with the future. And the only way they usually grew was through acquisition. That's a key point. The market-oriented CEOs tended to come from IT or marketing backgrounds, which was kind of a key differentiator. They were sometimes satisfied, not so satisfied with their current results. Usually their companies grew faster than the industry rate. They were satisfied with the future because they saw it coming and knew what to expect. And they usually grew through new product or market expansion. And if you think of the operational folks as dogs and the marketing folks as cats, which is kind of a weird analogy, we did learn that a portion of the well-run, operationally fit companies have adopted market-focused activities and grew faster than their peers. And the other quote from the book, The Growth Gears, is that operationally focused companies led by operationally focused CEOs can become fast-growing agile cats. It really can happen. So if you were wondering what are the growth gears, if you hadn't seen this before, somebody have a question? Okay. These are what the growth gears are. We've got 3 gears. We've got the insight gear, also known as the knowledge gear, the strategy gear, known as the effectiveness gear, and the execution gear, known as the efficiency gear. And this is primarily lines out a disciplined process for growth. So in my background, going through things like this, I've done all sorts of different, what I'll call executions for how to do growth and define positioning and whatnot. And this is a great way to do it. And in this case, on the insight gear, because you have to know knowledge, you have to know what's going on. You study the customer, the company, and the competition. The strategy gear, you look at markets, what products and services you're offering, and this is where you get into positioning. And then finally with execution, look into resources, tactics, and metrics. For a little bit more detail on each one, when you're looking at the insight, it's like, who is the target? What is the target market? What is the value of our product or service to our customers? And this is where you get into doing SWOT analysis and customer surveys and voice of the customer and things like that. On the strategy side, this is where you start looking at markets and how you're going to grow. What kind of messaging are you doing? What's communicated? And very important that hopefully I'll touch on this enough, but alignment internally is very, very, very important. Then finally on the execution side, what sources is deployed? What needs to be executed? How will it be measured? So you really want to look at your key performance indicators, communication, and budget. So let's first go into building your knowledge gear. Before I do that, does anybody have a question so far?
Well, I have a question and comment both. So when you talk about alignment, you talk about kind of like, do you guys focus on like the good to great thing of get the people in the right seats, just don't have the right people, but also in the right seats, like organizational people alignment or not?
We are more marketing consultants, but we verge on the business consultant, Richard, because like one of the folks that we work with a lot of the EOS people, I can think of the acronym and not what the EOS,
Entrepreneurial Operating System.
Yes, thank you. So we work with those folks. We actually get some customers and clients from there because if you've read Traction or know their process, the marketing chapter is fairly thin. I mean, it's usually really well set up. So we do get into that a little bit, and we certainly have some CMOs that can actually speak to that better, but not like I could. But in general, no, but it can happen.
Well, I didn't figure you did, because your focus and expertise is marketing, but I just wanted to touch.
Yeah. So let's talk about the customer, company, and competition. So anybody been in a meeting somewhere where it's like who should we target? And somebody said, I think everybody in the world is our oyster. And I've got to message Jim to admit somebody on a telephone call. Should I go ahead and admit them? It's a 404 number, 1440. You're on mute.
I guess so. You can mute them if they start saying something we don't like.
Okay, I admitted them. So I like this cartoon. Like, who else should we target? The world is our oyster. As you know, niche rhymes with rich, and it's important to have a niche market as well as anything else. So that's why this is important. Now my computer froze by doing that. Great. There we go. All right, so as I mentioned, Chief Outsiders works a lot with business-to-business companies. I was a business-to-customer or consumer marketing person, so we had different types of customer strategies that weren't quite this robust. When you're working with business-to-business people and you're selling a product to certain customers all the time, there are things you can do to grow. You can milk certain customers by just giving them price increases so often, provide average service levels, and even customers that don't order very often or are difficult, you may fire them. That's the kind of milking strategy that one would use for a customer profile. And I'm looking at the lower left-hand quadrant on this grid now. If I go up to the top left corner, maintain strategies, including things like you might move them to a mid-tier, take a little bit higher pricing. You're going to give them incentives to give you more business. You might actually increase your margins by taking your price up without taking your cost down, etc. And then you might actually target your customers' competitors as to be more of your customers. A lot of companies have to do that just because the market's not so big, but it is a strategy one can take to try to go after similar customers to the ones you have now. That's a very sound strategy, as a matter of fact. On the lower right, you have growth strategies where what if you've got some customers out there and they're struggling with growing, you go, hey, we're selling you this widget, but if you buy more widgets, to help you sell more widgets, we will do some innovation meetings with you and actually help them work on their strategy to grow. And then finally, going up the upper right, platinum strategies can include taking those growth strategies of having the innovation meetings, providing more sales focus, etc. Let them know you've made them a platinum level, that they're a very important customer to you. You might sign a long-term contract for a lower price, etc. Then obviously provide higher service levels. So just different ways B2B companies can look at their customer profit potential. Typical questions you want to ask is like, what is your company known for? What value do you deliver to your customers? How well does it deliver across specific attributes of the product or service? And how does the value of the company deliver compared to the competitor's value or the competition's value? So to give you an example when it comes to looking at customers, and this is going to be a business to customer example. In the late 90s and early 2000s, Carl's Jr. determined their key target to be hoofus. Anybody know what a hoofu is? Any takers? It's heavy fast food users. And at the time, Carl's Jr. used a campaign that was called, it was very controversial. Oops, back up, trying to check that. If it doesn't get all over the place, it doesn't belong in your face. And what they did during this, or leave the ones back in just a second. They used sexy models, and there was a lot of basically sex sells, but I knew the CMO at the time, and he said, every time, the more complaints we get, the higher our business goes. So they stuck with that campaign into the early 2000s, but it was a great example of targeting heavy fast food users who were 18 to 34-year-old males, and it's important to have that really tight target to be successful in business.